Welcome to Unmasking Social, where we talk about building real friendships and meaningful connections without masking who we truly are. I'm your host, Sharon Baum, a speech and language pathologist with an expertise in social thinking and how it relates to autism and ADHD, specifically with our teens and tweens. Let's dive in. Hello, and I just want to wish everybody a happy weekend, wherever you are on the spectrum of feelings. I just want to hope that this weekend rejuvenates you in whatever way that's needed. Our batteries aren't always visible, but sometimes the battery just remains uncharged. So let's all recharge our social batteries so we can show up for everybody that we want to show up for. And let's pick who we want to show up for. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Unmasking Social. I am your host, Sharon Baum, and today we have Lauren Greenwood on the podcast, a speech and language pathologist who has developed a really wonderful SOCIALSPARK, as we call it, curriculum that is a visual support that can support many of our students. So, Lauren, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. I'm so glad to have you. We overlap on so many things, and we're going to get into it through our conversations just about how there are so many supports out there that help our individuals with social communication. And you're someone who's really trying to support with something that kind of sparked you, and now you have that. So can you tell us a little bit about your journey into speech and language pathology and how you ended up where you are right now?
Yeah, thank you for having me. So happy to be here. Honestly, I was always been very, very fascinated by communication and realized at a very young age that communication is really the starting point of building relationships and experiences. And without sort of communication, I was noticing that individuals who didn't have strong communication skills were really having difficulties connecting with peers and building relationships and advocating for themselves. And I really early on saw that kind of needs area and really wanted to support kids. I love working with kids and youth and really wanted to kind of support that population in this area. And I think the other reason I was always really drawn to the field is that I knew sort of early on that there was a lot of like research and evidence-based that sort of guides the profession, but also so much room for creativity and individuality and flexibility. And I really think it's the best of both of those worlds. So I started out, I've worked in pediatrics exclusively for over 12 years now, and had a lot of work with social communication, which sort of brought me to the development of SOCIALSPARK, which I'm sure we'll get into. But that's sort of kind of the evolution of how I got into the field in general.
It's so interesting because you bring up a point about being fascinated by the social communication piece. And I connect with you on that because I, for so many years, also was working on social communication with individuals with autism, which is how this podcast was born. And there's something so interesting about the nuances of social communication, the shades of gray, the different supports. I know both of us we spoke before the podcast, really love the concept of social thinking and really getting into the minds of the individuals so that we can kind of think about their strengths and interests and really tailor each approach that we have to accommodate the needs of our students with social communication. So it sounds like you, like me, have been really dedicated to this in many different ways. And I'm just curious, so you enter into this world of speech pathology, you work with pediatrics, you have a little bit of a research background. I know that it's more from graduate school and you're blending this research with your clinical skills. Was there anything that you were noticing in the schools or in the clinics that you were working in, specifically as it pertains to social communication, where there was maybe a gap?
Yeah, and that's really the impetus for me creating what I created. So I had this period of time in my clinical work where I had a very large portion of clients who were great communicators in that they had a lot of wonderful language. They wanted to connect with others. They wanted to have those relationships and really build relationships on the basis of communicating, but really were struggling with the conversation-based skills. So they understood the social environment. They understood sort of how to navigate it all. But when it actually came down to having a conversation with their peers or their teachers or their parents or whoever it might be, there was really sort of a lot of difficulties in navigating that. And so I started to sort of create tips and tools and strategies of my own to support this particular goal area. And I was finding that it was quite successful, and my clients were really responding well to some specific guided strategies that they could sort of have as a visual reference point as they were navigating conversations in their own life. And that's sort of how SOCIALSPARK Conversation Picture Cards came to be, as I sort of put all of these strategies and tools together and created a deck of cards that really sort of walks the user through a conversation from start to finish, helps navigate conversation barriers that I was, again, finding were coming up repeatedly with my clients. And then this big sort of self-reflection piece. How do we online in a conversation make sure that we're doing certain checks and balances to ensure that I'm engaged, my conversation partner is engaged, we're reciprocal, we're sharing information, we're gaining information, we're retaining information, kind of all of those important aspects of a successful conversation.
Yeah, and you're definitely speaking my language as a fellow speech and language pathologist who is all about social communication and pragmatics. And for our listeners who may not know about social pragmatics is the ability to navigate the social world and understand the nuances of social thinking, which is breaking down what is going on around you to understand social, which can be difficult at times for many of our autistic teens and tweens, and even our neurotypical teens and tweens, because social has evolved so much. And through this evolvement, curious, have you also noticed any other tools that have worked to support your teens and tweens or young adults or children in developing their social communication, or things that may have not worked as well just through trial and error?
Yeah. So, I mean, there's so many great resources out there. We use social thinking a lot, Superflex and the Rethinkers program, and kind of all of those tools in sort of helping children, teens, tweens understand kind of the social landscape and how to kind of navigate that. Social stories is another big one that I've used a lot in my practice, both in terms of preparing for a situation that's sort of upcoming and or managing situations that are potentially nerve-wracking, anxiety-provoking, and sort of being able to kind of explore what that might look like. And so I think it always comes down to visual support that seems to resonate really, really, really well. So, and both of those kind of areas that I just chatted about are both very kind of visual types of tools where there's some kind of visual that the client or child or teen or tween can resonate with, and it just kind of sticks at it, whether it's a social story that they can then kind of replay in their mind because they can see the pictures, or the social thinking characters. So I think that anything that's really visual, I have found to be very successful. I haven't had sort of any tools that I haven't found as successful. I think it's more about what resonates with the client, right? So if they're bought into it and they like it and they like the visuals and they feel like they can connect with the material, then it's a go. And if not, then, we move on to the next.
Yeah. I mean, visual supports are the key of supporting our children because, again, I mean, there's only so much verbal can do to support our children. Verbal supports, visual supports are critical for our learners who are visual learners oftentimes, right? And this social spark that you have invented and you have really developed, I know the impetus was really to kind of think outside the box of a new way of thinking to help our students understand the social world. And we're living in a world now where sometimes the neurotypicals don't understand even our own neurodiverse or autistic teens and tweens, right? And so there's kind of this balance between both of them understanding each other. Can social sparks do that in order to kind of bridge that gap between the neurodiverse autistic teens and tweens trying to work through understanding social, but then also the neurotypical individuals also understanding social? Can these cards be used for both?
I love that question. And yes, they really are so versatile and can really be used by both a wide range of individuals based on age and based on need as well. I really developed the deck so that it would be as open-ended as possible. So it could be picked up by a neurodivergent teen themselves and they could sort of walk through it, or it could be picked up by a caregiver who can help their child sort of walk through it, Or for neurotypical kids, teens, and tweens, I'm finding that those conversation skills can be really, really challenging in other ways. But, so much of our life right now can be done without having to communicate. We can go to the store and use self-checkout. We can pay at the pump. We can do mobile order. And we're losing so much of this practice. So even for the neurotypical kiddos, I still find some of them can benefit from support with their conversation skills. So the tool really is versatile in its use for a variety of different needs and kids, teens, and tweens.
And you touched upon something really important, which both of you and I are aligned on, which is the individualized supports, right? Based on strengths and interests. And it seems like the SOCIALSPARK conversation cards are individualized. And I would love for you to talk more about how versatile it is and how it can be differentiated based on level of support that someone needs. Because some people may be starting out in their social communication journey, while others may be a little bit more advanced in their social communication journey and are now at the point of self-advocacy. And some people are just starting at the first step of building up self-awareness. So can you just kind of lay it out there, maybe show us a little bit about these cards and how they work?
Absolutely. So the whole premise of the cards is that conversation is like a game of catch. And that is the visual analogy that's used throughout the deck. So when we are starting a conversation, we're going to wind up the ball. We don't want a hard throw right away and sort of like a hard launch into the conversation, which might seem a bit abrupt. We want to kind of beat into it. And then when we throw the ball, we're going to ask the question. When we answer the question, that's like catching the ball. We're going to set it down for pause at various moments. So every card in the deck, and I'll just sort of fan them out here, has reference to the ball analogy for users who need sort of that explicit instruction. These are the backs of the cards. And so for somebody who's potentially starting out on their journey where they really do need to see where that ball is at every point in the conversation so that we are making sure that we are doing all the parts. We're winding up, we're throwing, we're catching, we're holding, we're setting down. We should be really doing everything within a conversation if we want it to be sort of a well-balanced reciprocal interaction. So the analogy is there for users who can benefit from that really explicit instruction and kind of seeing that over and over and really sort of tracking the conversation. But it can also just be used in the background. So with many of my clients who are sort of a little bit further along in working with this, we might not be drawing attention to the analogy at every point, but at one point I might say, you know what, it seems like I've had the ball for a really long time. I'm going to pass it on to you. Little sort of moments of referencing that analogy as little check-ins can be really, really helpful. So that's what makes it so versatile, is that the analogy is there, the visual supports are there, they can be used as much or as little as needed, but they always just are in the background so that everyone is on the same page as to where they're at in that interaction.
You touch upon something that's also really speaks to me, but also speaks to anybody who's listening, which is not just the versatility of the cards, but also thinking about the metaphor that you're using, right? Because again, it's not just the visual, but also what's behind the visual in terms of how do we break this down so people can understand, right? Because it's not intuitive and there are so many hidden rules and there are so many concepts that are not automatic for our neurodiverse students. But sometimes when we use things like we used to use pass the baton, right? Like I have the baton now, kind of it reminds me of Lord of the Flies, right? You hold the conch. I mean, things don't end up like Lord on the Flies usually in our sessions, right? Because that would be kind of dangerous. But, you know, you got the baton and now you get to choose who you pass the baton to. And now I like this because this is now a ball, right? And you have the ball and now you get to choose. You're giving agency, it sounds like, to the individual about what they want to do with the ball, right? If they want to pass it, who they want to pass it to, right? And then with these cards, it sounds like they can be moved around. So they can use these cards and think about how they're going to pass the ball with the visuals alongside with them. Or is this something that can be used in sessions at home? Or how can they utilize it beyond for ultimate carryover, as us SLPs love to say?
Yes, exactly. So yeah, I mean, certainly a physical ball is a nice way to start because that really brings the analogy to light. But it, again, doesn't have to be used that way. they, again, are really made to be used anywhere and everywhere. So in clinic, absolutely. Lots of therapists in schools are using them in small group settings or with one-on-one students at home. Because they're so visual, you could just kind of have a few out on the table and just they can become kind of a conversation starter. Or if you're going to a birthday party and you know that there's a couple skills or couple really tricky things, bring the cards that are sort of relevant to that content. Mom or dad or caregiver can pop them in their bag and sort of review them in the car beforehand. So they really are flexible in sort of where they're being used. And the deck doesn't have to all stick together. You can kind of pull out what's relevant or what you want to work on now.
I think that's so great because context shifting is so difficult, right? So what happens at a birthday party versus what happens at someone's gym class versus what happens at someone's social group after school, right? Or what happens at home with their sibling. At every context, for those who are listening, can probably relate to this if they're listening to the podcast about context shifting. And it's not so easy to shift context. But what you're allowing for, it sounds like that these cards can also be brought or reviewed before a situation that might feel different or maybe anxiety provoking. And I bring up the A word being anxiety, which ties into some of this, right? Which it sounds like these cards can also maybe be a buffer to some of the anxiety that children are feeling or teens and tweens are feeling as they navigate maybe a new situation or a situation that looks different than it was before.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, again, the visual really helps with that because it keeps everybody kind of grounded, right? So if you're in a situation that feels nerve-wracking and you're not sure, Johnny just told me something and where can I go next in the conversation? Okay, think about where that ball is. And that just sort of grounds me, right? And I can kind of come back to that analogy. And as I said, bringing a few cards before a situation that might be stressful or challenging and sort of reviewing them ahead of time can be one way to sort of mitigate some of that anxiety, but also just in the moment. I'm really hoping that visual analogy and what I found in practice is that visual analogy can really just sort of click us into, okay, I know where I'm at right now. It takes sort of the thinking away from it. And I know where is that ball? What's my next best step based on kind of where I can take the interaction next?
Yeah, this all sounds so great. And there are so many different tools out there. And I think yours is a bit different than many other tools, right? I'm going to put you on the spot here. How is SocialSparks different maybe than many of the other social supports that are out there? And again, all these supports are wonderful, right?
Of course.
But yours is very unique in the sense that there are layers to it that maybe others don't have. Can you shed light a bit on the difference between this and maybe how it can support specific people who may not benefit as much from other supports?
No, for sure. Thank you. Yeah. And I think I was noticing this gap, and the gap was really around the actual process of the conversation. So I think that's really what differentiates it, is that it really is a guide through kind of what a conversation looks like. What are all of the elements? What are the steps? How do we check in? How do we navigate barriers? And so I think what makes it different is that on one hand, it's very specific to those conversation skills, which a lot of other tools aren't as sort of specific around the actual interaction skills, more sort of the broad social situation. So they're very specific in that. Also, we can pull back and we can make them as general as we'd like them to be, right? So we can allow clients or children or teens or tweens to pick a few things that they'd like to work on. And it doesn't have to be that they want to start from start to finish in the interaction. They might just want to pull a few different cards and work on those so that it can be sort of made a little bit more general to whatever somebody wants to work on. So I think that's really what makes it different, is that we can kind of zoom in on those specific conversation skills, but we can also kind of zoom out. And there isn't really a tool that kind of walks you through all the steps of a conversation. So for those clients who are getting the social world, they understand how to kind of navigate that social thinking piece. But when push comes to shove and they're face to face, having a conversation with an individual or in a group, and that's where the barrier is, this is where this would come in.
Yeah, because the authentic piece or the organic conversation, it looks very different than what looks like in a speech and language session, right? Actually having that natural back and forth is ultimately the hardest part of all of this. But you're speaking to the process. You're speaking to what leads up to it, which Social Sparks is really rooted in not just the end, but the process that leads up to it. It kind of reminds me of a conversation I was having with an executive functioning specialist, which kind of also working backwards sometimes, right? When you're thinking about even organizing, thinking about, okay, wait, how do I get to done? But then I'm going to go backwards and then think about what I need in terms of to get to done. So it sounds like we're thinking, or the students are thinking about, where do I want to land, or what do I want out of this conversation? And then take a step back for the process of how I'm going to get there. Do you mind giving an example? You showed some pictures up there, and for those listening on audio, but an example of maybe how you used one of those cards with a student and maybe how they used it in different ways or in different situations and contexts?
Absolutely.
I'm so curious myself. So
yes, I know.
It's also feeding my indulgence.
I totally get that. Okay. So one of the big ones is easing in. There's a couple easing in. Okay. So here are the two sort of easing into the conversation. So this is my wind up of the ball so that I'm not sort of a hard launch in with a topic. I'm sort of kind of easing it. And this is like our small talk. And I think small talk is something that is so challenging for kids and teens and tweens.
And for me too.
Right?
Yeah.
So, okay.
Do you get it? I mean, small talk, I feel like for so many of us, I don't know if you feel the same way, but I feel like it's just so hard sometimes. Yeah.
It's hard. Yeah. And often small talk is the bridge between a hello and a bigger conversation. And if we don't have that little bridge, then we're not sort of immediately getting that initial connection and ensuring that the other person wants to have this conversation, right? It's a bit of gauging, right? So we created two easing in cards. One is we can make a social comment, and one is we can make a comment about the context. So I'll just sort of show you both. So this is we're going to wind up before throwing. Before starting the main conversation topic, you can ease into the conversation with a social comment. So something like, it's so nice to meet you, for a new conversation partner, or it's so nice to see you again. And then from there, it says, and that you might want to consider pausing to allow your conversation partner to ease into. So that sort of that little reciprocal exchange before we get into the main topic. And then for the commenting on a common context, something like, I've seen you back at school and it's September and it's day one. Instead of, hi, what did you do this summer break? It's, hey, it's so nice to see you. How was your summer break? Or it's so nice to be back at school. So we're commenting on the common context that we both find ourselves in. Or it's really nice to finally be getting warm weather. Common context, we're both in this together and we're sort of easing into the interaction. So, and then again, it invites the person to allow their conversation partner to also jump in, to make a comment, to ease into that conversation. So it really allows for that initial connection right off the bat.
Yeah. So that's so interesting because a lot of what we connect on is the unscripted language, right? Because we can't really teach social in a way where we're telling them, okay, just do this instead. We have to use a lot of metacognitive skills, a lot of thinking about thinking, which is really tough for our teens and tweens, children, and even young adults. And with these cards, though, we're not saying, okay, well, what's a better way you can do it? You used some words in there that I caught, which is I'm observing, I'm noticing, I'm seeing that you're stating, oh, like for small talk, like you stated hello. Like maybe I'm wondering with these cards, right, to support, I'm wondering if maybe there's another way that we can converse so that the other person may feel like, because they look like they're kind of not really checked in because it was just a hello. Maybe there's an alternative way to get their attention, right? And that can lead to the next step beyond just, hello, how are you? And more about, hey, even if it's just, I guess, hey, how was your weekend? Or hey, even just hello, nice to see you, right? Even that can lead, right? Even that comes a long way with our students. Nice.
It's those little moments of connection to get into that main conversation in sort of a way that feels comfortable for both people, and also to gauge the readiness and the interest from both sort of conversation partners.
whether it's a neurotypical or neurodiverse partner. It doesn't matter who the partner really is, right?
Of course.
And we live in a world that's still evolving, right? We're not there yet with the neuro-affirming completely. But if neurotypicals are engaged and the cards are there, I mean, you can also put the cards away, right? You can leave it near you, or you can, like you say, prep beforehand. So the portable piece of it maybe allows for someone who may not want the neurotypical peer or even their neurodiverse peer to look at it to just kind of prepare before something coming up. Which leads me into the next step, which is this is a support that can definitely bring down some of the anxiety around social, right? I mean, they always talk about risk assessment, and so many of our teens and tweens are still so terrified of being social because of how they might be viewed, which always goes back to confidence, right? So I'm just curious from your perspective on what you've observed in terms of facilitating confidence through these cards. Have you noticed any of your teens and tweens, young adults, gaining any confidence or showing you in certain ways that, wow, they now feel empowered?
Yeah. No, I love that question. And yes, so I think one of the big pieces is really asking those tricky questions to understand what is challenging for your client and what they want to work on, right? And so asking the tough questions, what topics feel really tough and which ones feel safe? Which communication partners for you feel comfortable and which ones are not so comfortable? And do we want to work on making those uncomfortable interactions more? And are we invested in that? And is that something that would be meaningful for you and have a big impact on your social life? And so I think really starting with those tricky questions, as I like to call them, and really understanding what's challenging and what the client wants to work on, again, sort of working from a neuro-affirming approach, is kind of the best way, because then we already know what they want to work on. And then once we start kind of diving into it and they start making gains in that area that they're so invested in, I really do feel like that is sort of a big driver for confidence. And a school therapist told me a little while ago how she was using the cards. And it sort of reminds me of this, where she put 4 or 5 on the table and she had a couple students in a social group. And she said, I want you to pick which one resonates with you, which one do you want to work on, and which one do you want to become more confident with, which skill. And one of the students said to her, this is amazing. This is like pick my own adventure. And I really loved that about it, right? Because there's 50 cards in the deck, and certainly there's a handful of them that resonates with everybody, whether it's the beginning of the conversation, the middle, the end, the barriers, the self-reflection, any of it. And so I think if we can sort of really hone in on what's challenging and what the client really wants to work on, what feels safe, what doesn't, and really sort of focus in those specific areas, I think that that's sort of one of the big ways to build that confidence when we can make it really specific and targeted.
Yeah. And so great, because like you said, it's a pick your own adventure, and that builds up confidence naturally because, as we know, our clients are intrinsically motivated, right? Social is an intrinsic motivation. So we want to hone in on, wait, what are the things that they really want? And so these cards are allowing them to choose and empower them to think about, well, this is what I want. And obviously collaboratively. But what you said about that teacher, because not only SLPs are using this, but teachers can use this as well in the classroom, which I want you to speak a little bit more about. You mentioned that the teacher stated that the individual was able to not just choose, but actually explain, and actually the teacher kind of went into the mind of the individual to think about what it was that was really bringing them down socially, right? And from there made kind of a connection, a collaboration in terms of what is important to them socially, right? And that's where the social curiosity comes in, because without it, we can't get anywhere with our children. And so it's so fascinating that now you have teachers using this. So can you speak more about how teachers and parents and everybody else can use this?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, one of the big things for me in developing it was I really wanted it to be as versatile as possible, not only just for the users, but also for those who were facilitating its use. And I didn't want any specific training to be needed. I really wanted anybody to kind of pick it up and be able to use it right away and just sort of launch in. And so one of the things I'll just show you is, in addition to the deck, because this helps sort of explain what I'm going to say, is there's also a flow chart that sort of walks you through kind of all of the cards and what leads into what. And it's all color coded that kind of matches the different sections of the deck.
Love the color coding.
Yes, me too. Again, visual.
Yeah.
And so really it's guided in that you don't need the training. Card sort of tells you where to go next, or the flow chart shows you where to go next. And so anybody can use, but you can also be flexible with it. Like the teacher that I noted, where she wasn't going from card 1 to card 50. She was picking a few cards at random that she thought would resonate and wanting to tackle some specific skills. So in terms of in schools, so often here in Canada, we call them resource teachers, or those kinds of support staff are doing small group work with kids who are working on social goals. So it really lends itself really well to kind of small groups in schools, at home, as I've said. Parents can pick it up and use it in whatever way, shape, or form works for them and their child. It can be used in bigger groups, and it can also be used one-on-one. So it's really versatile in use by clinicians, teachers, parents, really the full gamut. And that was one of my goals for is that I didn't want any specific training to be needed to use it successfully.
That's so great, because training is wonderful and we both love to get trained in things and develop our skills, right? But when it comes to schools and children attending school and there not being enough time simply in a day, right? Or even when they come home and they're exhausted, to just also enter into training mode. The fact that they could just pick this up sounds wonderful, and it just kind of speaks for itself. The directions speak for itself, as opposed to having to follow a whole set of training modules and then kind of get into it. Meaning, if I wanted to, I can get right into it right now, if in this moment, without training, because it's right there for me. So it's all laid out there. I'm curious though, it sounds like you have buy-in already from teachers, support staff, and others. How did that happen, if you don't mind sharing? Because buy-in is one of the hardest things, as I've been speaking more and more to people on my podcast, my own experiences in the school system. I find that some of us are in our own echo chamber, so to say, all of us that are in special education, and then we're trying to impact and influence others to think about what we're thinking and how it can impact our students. So is there any piece of advice that you can give to anybody listening in terms of how to get that buy-in from others in terms of the support? Yeah,
that's a great question. So I really am using kind of my Instagram page as a way to disseminate kind of clinical information and provide little sound bites. And with time, I'm hoping that more and more people will sort of come to the page and see what SocialSpark is all about and learn tips and strategies and tools that resonate with them and the populations that they're working with. So I would say also just personal connections, just knowing certain people in certain environments who I feel would resonate well, and just trying to kind of expand my online presence with it. Those are kind of the main sort of ways that we've so far gotten some.
Well, kudos to you that even via Instagram, people are starting to use this. I feel like it's so hard through social media for people to look at something and then just start wanting to use it or order it. I feel like sometimes you have to be kind of on the ground and really get buy-in by being there with people. But I'm glad that it's going a little bit outside our echo chamber, because our echo chamber knows how important these things are. But the outside of the echo chamber sometimes doesn't always know, just because they haven't been trained in special education the way that we have. Now, speaking of these social communication challenges, and speaking of just our autistic teens and tweens and young adults navigating a world that is ever evolving socially, like you touched upon earlier, the virtual world, right, which has its pros and has its cons. And we spoke about this on another podcast about attention spans being very limited at this moment as we speak. I don't know if people are still even tuned into this podcast, right? But with that being said, there are glimmers of hope in terms of even what we're facing in society as it changes. If you could spark one change in how society can view social communication challenges, what would it be?
Such a good question. I think for me, and I try to embody this philosophy as well, is that so much about our conversations and our interactions is not about the interaction being perfect. It's really about connection, right? And so I wish and I hope that the world would see that as well, is that we can connect with people in different ways, and that can be a successful interaction. It doesn't have to be a perfect interaction in terms of every aspect of the conversation and picking up on the social cues and all of that. And so with SOCIALSPARK, it really is so much about that connection, right? And so how do we build the connection at various points in the conversation? Maybe it's really tough for us to initiate the conversation and we sort of let our conversation partner take the lead on that, but can we get connected once we're in that talk? And so I think that that's really the big piece for society, is how can we get everybody on board with just realizing and acknowledging that connection is really at the core of all of it, and it doesn't have to be perfect interaction.
I love that, because I think that everybody puts pressure on themselves, especially the neurodiverse. I think so much pressure has been put on our autistic teens and tweens to live up to an expectation that we don't even have to live up to. I found that they're taught from a young age, if they're in a specialized program or even if they're not in a specialized program, in how to interact in a way that is so much more intricate than just us having a conversation. There's so many more expectations put on them. But what if we took a step back, and what you said is amazing, which is connection, right? Connection over perfection. I just made that up. Connection over perfection.
No,
because
sure.
Because again, I think that even I had someone on the podcast speaking about social anxiety even coming into the mix. And many people deal with social anxiety, but don't want to admit it because everybody still feels stigmatized around a lot of things. But it's because we're striving for this perfection, but there will be no perfection. Even us conversing, I've stumbled on some of my words. There are things that I have left out that I wanted to ask you that maybe after this recording, I'm going to say, oh, shoot, I wish I would have asked that, right? Or I wish I would have added to that. And we really don't know what's going on at the same time while someone's trying to converse. But connection is really what you're striving for here in society. You really hope for a world where people can view social as merely connecting. And it really reminds me of how when I was working with teens and tweens in a very specialized program, I remember that even sharing space was connection. Even sharing space with somebody is a connection, right? And then, of course, that lends itself to, there's somebody next to me, right? What are they doing there, occupying that space? What could we do next, right? And then eventually it leads into something deeper and small talk maybe. So staying connected is hard these days, even just because of the virtual stimulation, and connection is found through there too. And we support that. But yeah, the connection is so important. And your card lend itself to that because it prepares kids to be connected, right? In their own choice, in their own way, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And so, of course, just thinking about society, your cards born out of a mission to really support the social communication piece.
Yeah.
A lot of people that I speak to feel a little bit sad during times like these, just because they feel like social communication, even though it's being supported, sometimes it's taken a back seat in certain areas. Programs that were once really amazing are now not funded as well. And so there are people that feel a little bit concerned about the future. And AI keeps coming up too. Everybody's worried that AI is going to take over our whole world. And where are we going to go from there? I don't know, outer space, somewhere up. It only goes up from here. But what gives you hope? Because you're so energetic. You're so passionate. I hear it in your voice. I know how excited you are about the SOCIALSPARKs, but even beyond that, just your work in general with this population. Yeah. But what gives you hope in your work right now? And how can that hope be transferred over to our teens and tweens who right now, as we speak, are really trying so hard to fit in?
It's such a great question. And I think about it all the time. I think what gives me hope is that we can still teach this messaging to society that first and foremost, we need to connect with our teens and tweens and young adults and find things that make them tick. If we can find things that make them tick and we can get down at their level, I think that just opens up so many doors, right? And so after school, set up a game of Jenga before launching into a work or making dinner. or get outside and throw a ball around. Like those little moments of connection are really what sort of opens up those opportunities for interactions. And it doesn't have to be anything big, but I think that the more we do those things and we encourage caregivers to do those things and teachers to do those things and all of these different support people, the kids and the teens feel good and they realize it only takes a 5-minute game of Jenga to feel reset after a long day and feel connected with whoever is at home right now. So I think just really sort of trying to tap into the interests and build little moments of connection, I think has a big impact.
I love that. It's just those little moments, whether it's just playing for a couple of minutes or interacting for a few moments, that could be just a step in the right direction in terms of their right direction, what they want, because it all goes back to what the individual wants out of their social life. And there was something that you mentioned that really resonated with me in terms of even beyond the connection. You had stated that you are hopeful, obviously, that things can move in the right direction because there are little moments that can help. And you even touched upon social groups or social interactions, even after school, right? Just having little moments like that can really support the child. And you also mentioned something about, I'm trying to remember now, my working memory is a little bit off today, but you mentioned how those small moments growing into larger moments, but touching upon how you're still focusing on their interests, and Jenga might be an interest. And even if it's a 2-minute back and forth, that's still a success.
100%. 100%. Yeah. And the other thing I would say about that is I always try to encourage caregivers. If Johnny's come home from school and doesn't want to share anything about his day, let's take the pressure off, but share something with Johnny about your day, because Johnny might find it interesting. You might have seen something funny on a billboard. You might have heard that a new movie is going out. You might have eaten the most disgusting lunch ever, and you're just going to share that because it's something to share, and it's something that might spark a little conversation or a little interaction, right? So we can take the pressure off asking our kiddos for information about their day and share a little bit about yours. And I think that also is a way to really open up some nice moments of connection.
Yeah, I mean, I can't agree more. If I had a penny I love this on every podcast if I had a penny, I think should be a millionaire right now for all the pennies that I've collected for all these common questions, right, that come up, because caregivers and professionals and our autistic teens and tweens are working so hard, which is why I love this population so much. And you can relate to that, right? Because they're working so hard and they're so fascinating. And everybody that I work with just feels the same way. It's just a village of loving and supportive people. But when we come full circle, we think about how these individuals really have such great potential to be active social communicators and do great things in our world, even if they're struggling to fit in. And like you said, after a long day of school, if I had a penny for every time a parent said to me, oh, they come home and I ask them how their day was and they just say, okay. And they don't want to share anything with me. Or I ask them how the interview went. Oh, it was okay. And of course, as speech pathologists, we know that open-ended questions in general for anybody can be difficult, but especially for our autistic teens and tweens, because it requires them to take a step back and do all these metacognitive skills of perspective taking, thinking about what you're really asking. And if you're going to say, how was your day? Then okay, seems like a sufficient answer. But you're saying, why don't you share something from your day, right? Instead of putting the pressure on, take the pressure off and allow them to share or not share, depending on what's going on, so that could strike the conversation.
Yeah, exactly. And so you gave the example of how was the interview. Instead of that, I would recommend sharing an interview story. Oh, I remember I had this hilarious interview one day, or I had this interview that went really well because of right? And so just putting those little moments out there. And if our kiddo wants to react and they want to share something back, awesome. And if not, well, they've seen what does it look like when somebody shares something in this way? And that hopefully will resonate when they're feeling ready to share as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Lauren, for taking the time to speaking with me today, not only about social sparks, which I think can spark a lot of conversations beyond small talk and can really be individualized and can be used right now, But I would be remiss if I don't ask you, where can everybody find you?
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So I'm on Instagram. So I'm Social Spark Speech. So all one there. And the link to buy the cards, if interested, is in my bio. They are only available right now in Canada. Hoping to expand beyond that. But if you are in Canada or you make your way to Canada, that's where they're available. But apart from that, really my social media page is an opportunity to share clinical tips and tidbits and strategies. And I do hope that it's helpful.
Yeah. Well, first of all, beyond the cards, you implemented some great strategies even beyond the cards. So I want to thank you, because all of those strategies are strategies that are going to be so useful to anybody listening to this conversation that we've had, whether it be a parent, whether it be a teen and tween, whether it be a professional. So thank you for going really beyond just even your cards and just thinking about how we can help and support our teens and tweens that are working on social communication.
Thank you so much for having me.
Have a great afternoon there in Canada.
Thank you. Likewise.